to Entrepreneurs After Hours. We're speaking with Bill Flynn. He is a leadership strategist, decision-making expert, and the best-selling author of Further, Faster. He's the creator of the 5C Decision Design Model and Strategic Roadmap by Design, frameworks that help leadership teams reduce friction, align faster, and execute with clarity. Bill has coached hundreds of CEOs and teams across high-growth startups, operationally intensive businesses, and mission-driven organizations. How are you doing this morning, Bill?
I'm doing great, Malia. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome to the show, Bill. We really appreciate you being on here.
Happy to be here, man.
So, Malia, why don't you start us off with the first question for Bill?
Well, how did you get to this point in your career?
Good question. So I've had sort of two arcs to my career. For about 25 years, I did startups here in the Boston area. I've done 10 of them in that time. Pretty decent track record. I would consider it 5 for 10. I've been through 2 IPOs and 7 different acquisitions. Never the founder, but sort of the guy who always came in and helped scale the business, ran sales, marketing, COO kind of stuff, GM, that type of thing. And then about 10 years ago, I said, do I want to do an 11th startup? And the answer was yes, if I could figure out how to interview a founder and see if they were in the Goldilocks range, because founders have to be crazy, but they can't be too crazy. And I actually didn't think I could do that. The reason I was 5 for 10 is because the last 4 were disasters. So at some point I was actually 5 for 6, which was pretty good. And I struggled with mostly being the head of sales or head of sales and marketing, with finding a founder who understood how to do a startup well, and most of them didn't. So I decided I would try to go out on my own, and I had a really good experience between startup 5 and 6, where I sort of was a coach, if you will, and I wanted to try to do more of that. So I'm now and have been a coach for about 10 years. So I'm primarily a business growth coach, for lack of a better term. I'm also an author, and I do some speaking as well. So it's sort of where I am now.
So what made those later entrepreneurs ended up wrecking your track record? What made them fail instead of succeed like the first 5?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mick. So there is a dilemma that most founders have, which is they think their job is to convince everyone of how smart they are and what a great idea they have. But most people really don't care about your idea. They only care what it does for them. And so I struggled with saying, yes, it's an interesting idea. So for instance, I had one founder who had some great success in the past and was convinced that her idea was terrific. And I went out and I spoke to 80 different potential clients. And I sort of did a mix of selling and marketing, which isn't a great idea. But what I heard was, really cool idea. Never seen anything like it before. I have no idea how to use it. And I would bring that back to her, and she'd say, well, we just need to redo the deck. And we redid the deck. And she didn't want to go out and talk to them and say, well, what's the struggle with, where you couldn't find how it would work for you? Have you ever used anything like this before? Are you looking for these kinds of things? She wouldn't do any sort of discovery type of stuff. She just wanted to keep ramming it down their throat. And after $7 million later and cramming down the initial investors, pissing them off, the company went out of business. I had left years before that. So that's sort of I would say that's the main reason.
So it's mostly they're not willing to adapt their product, so they just keep trying to force the same product down people's throats.
Yeah, try to convince them instead of trying to understand, well, what struggles are you having? What kind of progress are you trying to make in your life? What have you done before? And trying to find, I think in most of these cases, if the either message and or product were tweaked, it could have potentially done something, but nobody was willing to do that. I had another example where this was between startup 5 and 6. I was doing some consulting, and I went out with a founder, and we did 3 sales calls over about a week and a half or 2 weeks. And after each phone call, it didn't go well. He would say they just don't get it. And after the third time he said that to me, I said, I can't remember what his name was. Let's say his name was John. John, I said, your sentence is absolutely correct, but your pronouns are backwards. They don't have to get anything. It's not their job to get your idea. It's your job to figure out how your idea can make their lives better. And I just see that too much with founders.
Are you familiar with a book titled The Lean Startup?
Yeah, Eric. Yeah. Eric,
yeah, I think that's kind of exactly what they're missing.
Yeah, so he had a great story in there. If you remember, he had a great story about, he sort of said, hey, I want to do this thing. And I think it was his first startup. And then 2 or 3 years in, he found that he wasn't in the right place, right? He ended up somewhere else. They were executing really well. Like he was executing like crazy, but he went in the wrong direction, right? And that's sort of what you do is you're too busy looking down. You ought, especially as a founder in a startup and even in general, you need to be looking out, right? Where are we going? Where are we headed? Are we heading to the right place? Do people care? Are they paying us, premium for what we're doing, etc.? So Eric is a disciple, if you will, of Steve Blank, if you're familiar with Steve Blank. So Steve Blank is the godfather of startups. He's a professor at the University of Berkeley. He did 8 startups in his career. He's probably in his 70s now. He's written some books. So I hate his books because they're written like a professor, but he's a great speaker. So that's where Eric came from. Eric was one of his students.
So he's like the mind behind the Lean Startup, but Eric rewrote it in a way that made sense and used stories
and his own experience
to get his point to real people.
Exactly. He took a lot of what
not just like a textbook.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's actually what got me to basically relaunch my pest control business, which has led to all the other ventures I'm involved in now. Super, super cool read.
Yep.
I think being adaptable, I think that's the main thing I learned from it, is being willing to adapt your idea and adapt what you're doing, because just doing the same thing again and again and expecting the customers to come to you just because you're putting work in or because your product's great doesn't actually get you anything.
Exactly. Yep. So true.
So with the startups that you've ran, what do you think the main thing, like across all the ones that you've worked with, that's really got you interested in them? Is there like a central idea across them, or central, I'm trying to figure out the word, something in common with all of them?
Yeah, sort of a thread.
That was what got you in?
Yeah. So I've thought about this a lot, and I don't know if I'm lucky or if I have some sort of special brain thing or whatever, but I was pretty good at guessing what the idea was and whether it would be something that could make a difference. So, for instance, in 1995, I was in e-commerce, and in 1998, I was in affiliate marketing. In 2005, I was in online data backup. Actually, if you want to go further back, in 1991, I was in speech recognition, which was a little early. And then I was in 2011, I was in mobile. So I sort of was lucky enough not to be on the bleeding edge. Came into those places for the most part, not all of them, in around when they were just about to get something going. And so the ideas were, the ideas that made sense to me. So that's all I can really say. I sort of took my own rubric and put it over it and said, does this make any sense to me? And for instance, I turned down an opportunity. I was aggressively pursued by a company that the head of finance for Intel started, called Pandesic. This was a long time ago, and they were definitely coming after me. They flew me out. They were basically selling me hard on why this would be such a great idea. And I'm sort of a skeptic by nature. And I would ask them a bunch of questions. And then at the end of the day, I said, here's the deal. Here's what I have learned, is that I don't really think there's a market for what you're doing. The way you're setting it up, et cetera, doesn't make any sense to me. I said, I might be wrong, but it doesn't make any sense to me. that people would pay this amount of money to do this type of thing that you do think they want to do. And I asked them, I said, so who have you talked to? And, they gave me this sort of wishy-washy answer, and it wasn't really very compelling or convincing. And I turned it down. I mean, they were going to pay me boatloads of money and give me lots of stock and whatever. And it's like, that's not the reason I do startups. It was because I love the puzzle of a startup. And you've never heard of Pandesic. It never really took off. So I'd like to say I'm just really smart and, a little bit of luck, a little bit of, wisdom, I guess. But that's sort of the way I've been able to see the thread through them. They were good ideas that had a shot. And in most cases, obviously we got e-commerce, we've got affiliate marketing is a big thing. Online, we all have now, Dropbox or whatever on our phones, but in 2005, that was weird. Anyway, so.
Yeah. That's super cool that you were so far ahead of the curve. Affiliate marketing, e-commerce, being in e-commerce before even the 2000s, that's insane. You really were looking way ahead into the future. It's become such a huge thing now. That's just incredible.
Yep. Yeah.
What got you involved with your first startup?
So my first real startup was probably Open Market. I talk about Dragon Systems, which was speech recognition, but they had been around since 1982, and I didn't start until 91. So my first real one was probably Open Market. And it's funny, interesting. I met someone at Dragon who he and I became fast friends, and then he wasn't happy where he was after about a year, and he left and he went to this company, and he was telling me about it. And I didn't really know much about the internet at that time. This is 94. But he started telling me about it. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I like that. And then I said, where are you at this point in the business? And they said, well, they actually had no salespeople. I was just a sales guy at that time. They had no salespeople. They said, well, we don't have any salespeople yet. I said, okay. But when they did, he introduced me to the guy who was the head of sales. I met with him, and he and I actually did 4 startups together after that. And it was me and him, and we had 2 or 3 other people that sort of came in and out with us. And that was also a big reason is he and I were enough the same and enough different that it made a lot of sense. He liked being in charge. He liked being out in front, and I liked getting stuff done. So he would be he was always, if he was the CEO, I was the head of sales. If he was the head of sales, I was the head of a region. If he was the head of a region, I was, one of the sales guys, whatever. That was a big reason, I think, why I was successful, because, we worked really well together. We had great trust with each other. So that was Open Market, which was called the Netscape of the East. It was, we had a huge IPO. We were worth $3 billion at some point. I think we had $5 million in revenue at that point. We were worth like $3 billion. It's crazy. A lot of people got rich from that opportunity. I was not one of them.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Super cool. So you kind of follow the same guy around company to company and work really well with him. Did he help you find some of your later startups, or do you find those organically and just happen to be working in the same startup as him?
Just me. Yeah. So after the 4th startup, we kind of went our own way. That was that was the 6th of the 5 of 6. It was the Anomaly. That was, we sold it, but we sold it back to the founder for 1x revenue. It was, I wouldn't consider that a success at all. Both he and I got into that, and it was in a lot worse shape than was sold to us. And we made it better, but the money people just had fatigue, and they're like, we're not going to put another, they had put $20 million into the thing already. And they just weren't ready to do it. And so they basically said, figure it out. And we sold it. They got, whatever, pennies on the dollar back. And then he sort of went his own way. And then I did my next one. Well, actually, that was that's when I took some time off between the two and just did some consulting. And then I went to the next one, which was email hosting. which, again, that was in 2009, 2007 when I did that. Now it's everywhere, but then there was no such thing, right? Gmail wasn't even in existence yet in 2007. And that's actually how I became a coach, was because that it was interesting. The guy who started said, "Hey, can you come in? I want to sell the thing. So can you come in and help me make it look as big as possible?" And I was running sales and marketing at that time, so I said, "Sure." And I came in and I hired some people. I put some systems in place, etc. And then about a year later, an IT services company bought him for, I don't know what the amount was. It wasn't a great amount of money, but he was a 90% owner. And he made enough money that he never has to work again. I see him on Instagram all over the world, climbing rocks and jumping out of planes and stuff now. But when he left, I took over the division. The CEO asked me to stay and said, "Hey, even though I don't like salespeople, you seem to know what you're doing. I'll give you a shot." And so I took over. But the first official day, the entire technical infrastructure collapsed on itself. So we didn't deliver email to anyone. And that sort of went on and off for 2.5 days. And so I was like, okay, what do I do? I've got 60 people who work for me. I've got thousands of customers. I've got all these big partners I got to work with. So I don't know if you're familiar with EOS or something like that. So I kind of put together my own EOS. I wasn't smart enough to know there was EOS out there at that point. So I sort of cobbled together stuff that I had been learning just through reading, and et cetera. I had 2 or 3 really good CEOs. I sort of stole stuff from them and I kind of mushed together this idea. And go forward 18 months, we were on our way to doubling the size of the company from when I took over. We were at about 8 million when I took it over, and we were hit that year. We ended up being 14 million. I didn't lose any of my employees, and we had lost 1,000 customers, but again, we had doubled it. So that was the experience I got. And all my numbers look great. And that's all wonderful. But the best part was 2 of the guys that I brought on when we were in this sort of crisis mode. I said, here's the deal. I said, I don't know how to run a network. I don't know how to do finance. I really have never run customer support before. So I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what I think it should look like when we're done. Like when we've sort of come out of here and whatever you call success. Let's discuss, debate, and decide that. And then I need each of you to draw a map, your roadmap from where we are today to what it looks like, what you need to help get us to that sort of that vision, if you will, for lack of a better term. And when I left to go do my next startup. The 2 of the guys who I work with said, I want you to know that thing you made me do, that roadmap, I hated it. It was really, really hard. But I'm so glad you made me do it, because now I know how to do this, right? I know how to fix stuff. I didn't tell them how to fix it. They figured it out on their own. We worked together as a team. And I sort of tucked that away and said, I want to do that again. I want someone to tell me that again, right? That I was able to do that for them. And so I did 4 more startups. And then finally I became a coach. And now I do it for a living. I'm not telling people how to run their company, but I'm saying, here's how great companies are run. And here are the ways that we can figure out how to make your company approach that greatness. And I get great notes from my clients. One of my clients just sold their business, and we stopped working together about 3 years ago consistently. And they would every now and again they'd send me a note or give me a call and say, just want you to know, we did our offsite and you were there, even though you weren't there. It says, what would Bill say here, and what question would Bill ask? And so it's kind of cool that you have that impact on people.
That is awesome, Bill. So with your shift to coaching, how do you find businesses that are interested in hiring a coach, and what role do you feel like a coach has within a business? Do you think there's a big market for it, or is it more of a niche to very specific businesses?
Yeah,
I'm curious.
So that's sort of a multi-layered question. So first, we should agree, what is coaching? Because coach is like strategy, right? It's just an overused word that we throw in all the time. I have friends of mine who are coaches, but they're just consultants or mentors or advisors, but they call themselves a coach. Or they're actually a therapist, and they realize that they can make more money by calling themselves a coach, even though they do the exact same thing. right? They'll make $500 an hour as a coach and only $100 an hour as a therapist. And like, okay, I'm a coach. So it really depends on what you mean by that. So I call myself a coach, but to be honest with you, I'm not really a coach. I'm a teacher. I have studied management science for 30 years. I've written books on it, and I've studied neuroscience, cognitive science, evolutionary psychology, and I incorporate all of that stuff into what I do. And I teach folks and I say, here's why people aren't doing the things that you want them to do. Right. And it's not because, it's not about banging the table. It's, this is how our brain works. Right. People, people say people hate change. And what I've learned is people don't hate change. They hate change being foisted upon them when they have no say in the matter. And then what they do is they have dissonance and they resist. They may resist actively or passively or whatever. That's why you're frustrated with them. Or, I used to be a Vistage speaker. And for those of you who don't know what Vistage is, it's sort of a peer-to-peer advisory organization. They're run by chairs and like 15, 16 CEOs and others get together and they help each other. And they would bring speakers in like me. And I would do the same bit every time. And one of the things I would ask is, I would say, we'd start everything and I'd say, so what is the biggest barrier to success right now? And, stock and trade of my Sharpies and stickies. And like, everyone write it down and we'll stick it up on the wall and we'll look at them all. And most of them are operational or execution oriented things, right? People aren't doing the right things. They're not doing the right way. They're not doing it on time, whatever those things were. And then I say, well, what are you executing on? And I just wait and then it'll be silence, right? And then someone would speak, well, it's the plan. And well, where did the plan come from? And I would try to get them to strategy, right? You're executing on your strategy. They're connected. And I said, so if I walked into your Monday morning leadership team meeting with the 5, 6, 7, 8 of you, and I asked everyone around the table to write down in their own words right now, without any prep, what is our current company strategy? And then I had everyone read them out loud. What would happen? And I would get a smile or a laugh every time. Oh, they'd be all over the place, right? I don't know what would happen. I said, so here's the deal. Since you're executing on your strategy and you're frustrated with the way they're executing, maybe what they're doing is they're executing really well on what they think the strategy is. And your job is to get them literally and figuratively on the same page. Then you might be less frustrated and they might have better direction on what to do. So if they do act autonomously, they're doing it in service of what you're saying your strategy is. So that's sort of what I've learned. And that's what I teach, right? I don't know if that's coaching or teaching or whatever the heck you want to call it. That's more like, I jokingly say I'm Socrates with a tool bag, right? I ask very basic questions like that. And then I say, okay, let's pull out the tool that we need to go and explore what that means to you. So that's sort of how I do it. So am I a coach? Sure.
That's really cool. So when you're talking strategy with businesses and trying to figure out what their long-term strategy even is, I've noticed a lot of entrepreneurs honestly have no idea other than I want to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
So do you run into that a lot with the businesses you're working with, trying to help them even understand what their strategy is? Or do they generally know what their strategy is? Or are they not communicating it to their employees?
Yeah, so I do the same thing with my clients, right? I'll ask them all pretty early on to write down what the current company strategy is, and then we put them up and they're all over the place. And many of them are not strategies. What you just described is not a strategy, it's an outcome. Making a lot of money is an outcome.
Yes.
Right? So, but how do you make a lot of money, right? What's the point? And Peter Drucker is really great here. As he says, the purpose of an organization, a commercial organization, is the creation of customers. That is their primary purpose, right? And in order to create customers, you have to understand and solve a problem worth solving for them. If you don't do that, then it doesn't matter what your strategy is because they're connected, right? So that part of strategy is sort of a zooming in, but zooming out on strategy is what are the fundamental tenets of what will make us successful, right? So I'll give you, since I'm a teacher, I'll do a little teaching, right? So it's either of you heard of Hannibal? Not the guy from
Hannibal Lecter?
The guy from the movie. Right.
Hannibal the cannibal?
Hannibal was a so Hannibal was a general who had fewer resources, less sophisticated resources, etc. And so he had to figure out, so how am I going to win? Like, what do I need to do? Because at that time, war was line everybody up in a straight line, and then you just crash at each other and just wail away. And generally, whoever had more people won. And the Romans generally had 2 to 3 times more troops than Hannibal had. So he was always trying to figure out how I can do this. So this was I've never seen this written down. This is my own interpretation of what he is. But his strategy was stun, surprise, surround, slaughter. And he applied that depending on the time of year, the time of day, what his resources were, what the Romans' resources were, whether he was uphill, downhill, what the conditions were, which was dusty, windy, whatever. And so he would apply that in different ways. So that was sort of the plan, right? The strategy, the strategic plan. But the strategy was always stun, surprise, surround, and he just applied it, right? But most people don't even know that. When I ask them what is strategy, and I've asked thousands of people this question, I get roadmap and plan, and I say, well, that's not what a strategy is. The strategy informs your plan. It is not a strategy in and of itself. And people would say to Jack Welch, who ran GM for many years and is touted as one of the best leaders around, he said our strategy is to be number 1 or number 2 in every market that we were in. That's not a strategy. That's a way of doing something, but how are you going to be number 1 and number 2? How are you going to figure out if you're number 1 or number 2 in every market? That's the strategy, right? That thinking, strategy is thinking, and the other stuff is doing. If it's a doing thing, it's probably not a strategy. It's a plan. And so what happens is we think we have a strategy, and then we fail. We struggle, right? Most businesses fail. After 5 years, most businesses go out of business. After 15, 20 years, there are only like 15 or 20% of them left. So we continue to go out of business because we don't think this way. We're too busy doing, right? We're too busy looking down, doing stuff versus looking out and really trying to figure that stuff out. And that's what I do. As I basically come in and say, look, you're making your life way harder than you need it to be. And I'm hopefully trying to make it easier for you. Yes, there's some hard work at the beginning, but once you figure out why customers buy from you and how you fit into the marketplace, and are you solving the problem as fully as you could, etc. How do you treat your employees well? How do you make sure you're setting up teams in the best possible way? Once you get all that done, everything else gets easier. But we don't ever get to that point because we're too busy working.
So at what point do you need to shift from kind of being in the field, just doing? Like when you first start a business, there's a lot of doing. If you're starting a tech company, you have to be building your product. With me, when I started my mole extermination business, I had to be in the field catching moles. At some point, though, you're not in the field anymore. At what point do you switch from doing to thinking, and how should that transition happen?
Yeah, so the way that I think about it is, if we sort of think of it in technology terms, right, or software terms, it's when you get product market fit. As soon as you get product market fit, then you're now scaling your business, right? And one of the things I love about Steve Blank, he says, the definition of a startup is a temporary organization in search of a business model. So when you get through product market fit, you have a business model, right? So now it's executing and accelerating your business model, because you know that when you do these things, you say this, you approach these people, et cetera, then N% of the time, someone buys from you, and they buy from you on an average size of the X, right, et cetera. Now you're like, okay, we know how to do it. Now we just have to do more of it. And it's not quite that straightforward, but for sake of argument. So you have to move. There's this concept that I have in one of my upcoming books, which is called you have to move from controller, which is what you just said, Mac, right? Is that you're controlling everything, right? You're doing everything. You're making all the decisions. You're doing all the problems. You're in everything. But at some point, that doesn't scale, right? You can't be everywhere, making all the decisions, solving all the problems, being accessible to everyone. Because one, you don't scale, and two, you're creating learned helplessness, right? They're just, every time something happens, they're like, they don't have to think. They just come to Mac and he makes the decision, right? And I heard a story from one guy. He said, he knew he was in trouble when someone came to him now they're like 100, 150 people now in terms of size. And they were asking him what kind of birthday cake that this person who was leaving, exit cake we should have for the person who was leaving. He's like, I don't care what kind of cake we have, right? I got other things to do, right? But he had created this environment where, oh, we got to check in with the boss to make sure whatever we're doing is okay. So the controlling part, I totally agree. You have to do that in the beginning. And by the way, that's useful because you're learning stuff. You're talking to the clients. You're in the market. You're seeing what your competitors are doing. That's really great. And by the way, almost always you grow because you are so close to everything that's important. But then you add layers of people between you and that, and then you become more and more isolated, and you don't find a way to reconnect yourself to that. Now you're making decisions the same way you did before, but you're doing it with less and poorer information. And so you start to make bad decisions or not as good decisions. So you go from controller to then you have a builder, right? So the concept I have is controller, builder to architect. So controller is I solve. Builder is I teach you how I do stuff, how I build, how I solve, which is good. But architect is I'm teaching you how to create systems where you don't need me at all. Right? And because your job eventually is not to run the business, it's to predict the future of the business and create the future of the business, which is looking out 1, 2, 3, 4 years. You can't do that, right? That's an innovation process. That's a creation process, right? And that's about insight. And insight is when you get an idea in your head that you didn't have before, right? So, and I ask this of lots of people, so I will ask it of both of you. When you get your best ideas, what are you doing?
I'm probably talking to my wife while driving my car. I think that's
Okay.
probably where they happen.
Interesting. How about you,
Malia,
Malia?
where do you get your best ideas?
Honestly, they come out of nowhere. I'll try to write them down so I can look back.
But what are you doing? What can you recall what you're doing when they come into your head?
Yes. We talk to each other a lot, and so a lot of my good ideas come from that, but sometimes they come from me just like sitting down and then a thought just hits me. Bam.
Yep.
And then I get it.
And that's what I hear most often. Oh, go ahead.
I think for me, just something about me moving keeps my mind from fixating on anything in particular, so
Right.
my mind can flow.
Isn't that interesting? So interesting. So there's a couple things. One is if you study evolutionary psychology, you understand that our brain was tied. So our brain is basically it sits in the dark silence, right? And it's relying on external and internal information to make decisions, and it makes most of our decisions for us. And it hasn't had a major upgrade in 10,000 years. 10,000 years ago, we as a species used to walk about 12 miles a day. So actually, when you walk, one of the theories is that you're actually triggering that, right? That's why you're doing, because your brain is like, oh, this is when I'm supposed to be thinking and doing stuff, right? And this is how it works, because it doesn't know that it's not on the prairie with 150 people in the tribe anymore. It doesn't know you're in a car or on AI. It has no idea. It still thinks it's somewhere else. That's why we make a lot of really bad decisions sometimes, because it still thinks, we're going to die if we get scared, or if we're going to do a public speaking thing or whatever, because your brain's like, oh my God, I know this feeling. This is when a tiger attacks me. It doesn't know the difference. So that's one thing. But the other is you generally get your best ideas when your mind is quiet. Right? I don't know what's happening with you and your wife, Mac, of why that happens, because I've never heard that one before. Mostly it's I'm running, I'm in the shower, I'm on a bike, it's early morning, or I'm almost going to bed. So your mind is just sort of quiet, and that's generally when insight happens. And insight is really a fusing of things that are in your brain that were never fused together before. And that's what creating the future of the business is about, right? It's about new ideas and new thoughts. And if you're always doing, you never allow your mind to quiet, so you don't get any new ideas. So as a leader, your job is to actually do less and think more, because that's how you get your business healthier and growing in a better way.
That's interesting. I know a lot of people kind of talk about how like being at the top of the food chain and being a leader means you're doing more. I know a lot of people, at least with kind of the older methodology, like my dad growing up, always talked about how to be the boss. You have to do more than everybody else. You have to work harder than everybody else. And to stay at the top, you have to be doing that. What you're saying is that's not true. You need to be doing less so you can spend more time predicting the future.
Yeah.
Is
So
that correct?
So what you're doing more of a different thing, right? So I don't know what your dad was saying, but mostly it's more operationally, right? I'm supposed to be doing more operationally, and we found that that's just not how the best businesses are run. That is conventional wisdom, right? Is that you're supposed to be first in the office, last to leave, always busy, always in meetings, always making things happen. And but if you look at the data, right? If you look at the data over 25-year span with Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Department of Labor, most businesses go out of business. Most employees are disengaged. So why should we keep doing the thing that's making things worse? We should probably try something else. And if you look at the outliers of businesses that have gone through generations, they do the same few things really well, right? And so they understand that their job is first to be a great team leader. How do I attract, form, craft, build, and develop great teams? Because teams do most things where the team doesn't need me. Once in a while they'll need me, right? But they don't need me to run that part of the business anymore. The other is to have a really good operating system, like scaling up or EOS or whatever that thing is. There's some sort of, you have to understand that your business is really just one big system made up of a bunch of subsystems. And then make sure you drive your business towards cash, not revenue, because if you want to grow, you have to spend money, and you generally have to spend money in front of your growth. So you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, it's driving cash into the business. So then you have the ability, one, it serves two purposes. One is it's fuel for growth, and the other is it's a safety net, because as we know, every 6 to 8 years, something bad happens, right? COVID, 9/11, 2008, whatever it is. And those people who didn't have money in the bank and acted as if everything's always going to be great all the time, guess what happened? They either struggled or they were purchased by the ones that were healthier. And now businesses, in 1950, if you were on the stock exchange, Fortune 500, you were there for 50 to 75 years. Now it's 15. That's the average. That's crazy, right? It's because we're still doing it the old way.
That is interesting. I don't know if this was said earlier or just now. Back when you're talking about I think it was hero, builder, architect.
Yeah, so controller, builder, architect. Yeah, so you have to move through those stages where you're not the doer anymore. You're not even the one who shows people how to do things the way you do it. Because by the way you do it is great. But if you're only one person with limited experience, if you have 50 to 100,000 people, they might be able to do, especially collectively, something better than you can do on your own. So let's give them the opportunity to do that, right? Let's build a great team and let them work together to come up with better ideas. And I my leaders, when I work with them, when they finally got to that, they're like, oh, they came up with something I never would have thought of. I'm like, exactly, right? You shouldn't be the one having to think of everything, right? So you have to be in a situation where you can create the environment so that happens. That's your job, eventually. But it's a process, right? And I agree with you. You start at hero or controller, and you have to be that way. But you have to also, if you want to grow and keep growing, you can't be that. Everything that you learned will now be working against you. You have to be willing to say, I don't need to be the answer person. I don't need to make all the decisions. I don't need to have my door open and be accessible to everyone. My job is to say, if you come to me and say, I get to do this, is a problem, et cetera, and say, so what do you think we should do? What would you do? Do you remember the standard and how we do that, right? And how our business works, et cetera? You might ask questions, let them figure it out. Then they get more confident. And now you've got, instead of you and maybe a few people figuring out everything, you've now got 10 to 100x people doing that. That's what you want.
Finally remembered what I was going to ask you.
Yes, I was stalling long enough to hopefully have it happen.
I appreciate it, Bill. I've been sitting in a hot car. Mine's starting to go, but What I was going to ask you is, how do you go about setting those strategic goals and actually predicting the future?
So you have to zoom out and you have to zoom in. So zooming out first is, where are the unmet needs in this world that we're in? Either that we're not solving, etc., or maybe there's an unmet need that's not being met at all. Um, so you have to find a problem worth solving first, right? So you look at the marketplace, you look at what you're going through, you talk to, you're going to have to come up with some hypothesis, right? It's fine to do that, but if you don't have any parameters around or constraints, then you could come up with a million ideas, but eventually you got to sort of home in on one. So having a hypothesis is good, right? Saying, I think this is a problem, and usually it's something that's causes dissatisfaction with you, or maybe someone close to you, and you're like, hey, I think I could do something about that. Or it just might be luck, right? I mean, Airbnb started because Brian and Trent and whoever the other guy said, we don't have any money, but there's a big convention in town. Maybe if we, had someone come in and live with us for the convention, they'd pay us money and we could pay rent, right? That's how the idea came up, right? It was out of necessity, and but it was a clever idea, and then they obviously built it into this massive business eventually. But it wasn't a smooth ride. It wasn't easy. They had to figure stuff out, and they struggled as well. They didn't really figure out the product market fit until Brian went to New York, where most of his customers were, and sat with them and said, show me how you use my product. How are you doing things? And he'd watch them literally on the app doing stuff. And then he came back to the other two founders and said, we got to do everything differently. This is what people want. We've built this thing, is what we want, but they're using it this way. And that's when they started to take off, because they understood the struggle of the client and what they were trying to accomplish. And they're like, okay, now we know what to do. So you have to do that as well, right? And that's part of your strategy, being informed by your client, your core client, not all clients, but your best client, the ones who will pay you the most, who will lodge you, will give you referrals, etc. So that sort of strategy, right? Zoom out to the market, understand what's going on, et cetera, and then zoom down into your customers, and also zoom down into yourself, because you might find that you found a problem that's worth solving, et cetera, but you don't like it at all. It doesn't fit into your passion. It doesn't fit into your skill set. You don't want to do it. If you do that and you go ahead and move ahead, I would say within 5 years, you're going to be miserable, right? So those things have to happen as well. So there's a confluence of things that have to happen that allow you to really have the strategy be successful.
Awesome. So we got a couple closing questions I just like to ask when I interview people. The first one is, if you could go back in time to when you started your journey as an entrepreneur, what piece of advice would you give yourself back when you were first starting?
Yeah, it's funny. I say this all the time because I wish I knew then what I know now. Because my life was much harder than it needed to be. I did relatively well. Just sort of, when it made sense to me. But I would go back and say, look, there's a huge gap between what science knows and business does. And I was doing what business does. I was doing what people told me. I was doing, I was told as a sales guy, right? I was told, hey, you need to create rapport with people. You need to know your product. You need to know your competition. You need to know the market. And I said, okay, great. And I did all that. And I was generally likable and whatever. And I sucked as a salesperson. I was terrible. And I'm like, well, why? I'm doing everything I was told to do. And I'm doing it pretty well. And I'm told I'm doing it pretty well, but no one's buying from me. It's not working, etc. So then I stepped back and reflected and said, well, what is selling? And I said, well, selling is helping someone make a decision. So I said, okay, well, let's talk about, well, how do people make decisions? And that's how I get into neuroscience, was I said, oh, the decision is actually made in the brain. So I learned how people make decisions. And then after I did that, I was the number one and number two salesperson everywhere I went, because I knew how to do it. And I knew that when people make decisions, the limbic system lights up in your brain, which is the emotional center of your brain, which has no language whatsoever. So unfortunately, we as human beings make decisions emotionally, and then we make up reasons after the fact. So basically, we lie to ourselves as to why we made a decision. Now, you don't have to do that, right? You can say stop and wait and then think it through, you can avoid that. But if you don't do that process, then you're just automatically, your brain is automatically making decisions for you outside of your conscious awareness. And then you're just making up reasons after the fact. So I said, okay, now how do I do that? And then I created an environment where I was able to, in essence, manipulate the person on the other side, because I knew stuff they didn't know. Now I could use it for evil, but I did not. And it just worked. And I taught everyone I met how to do this, right? And so we would have good salespeople. So that would be the thing, that go back and just sort of really understand first principles. Then you can work from there, and you'll be much better off than just, we solve the problem from the middle way too often. So that's sort of the thing I would say to myself.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Bill. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. Well, thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on the show. I think that's it for the show. Do you have anything else to add, Malia?
No, but thank you so much for the advice and for all the things you said. I know I was like, wow, that is so interesting.
Oh, yeah, good. That's hopefully the reaction I'm looking for. But good luck.
Yeah, it was an honor.
Have fun doing this.
It was an honor talking with you, Bill. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Thank you, too. Take care.